Shalom. First and foremost, I'd like to give all praise to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem, Rakakadash. Double honors, the elders and apostles of Great Millstone, who are teaching us truth with sincerity. And shout out to Yakims out there in the four quarters of the earth proclaiming this truth. Brak of the Yahweh, Brak of the Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem, Rakakadash, Brakatem. So we hold Bishop Nathaniel in contempt. It's June. Ain't no mark of the beast out yet. You know, ain't no microchip. You know, well, it's still in the plan of making, and what fucking difference does it make as to the month, the day, and the year? Because no one knows the time but Yahweh. Not even Yahweh Shai knows the time of his return. So we don't know the timing of these events, but we know that these events will commence. You know, so you know your impatience. Well, that's just it, though. Is that you took a bribe and you're being found out. This is the year of apostates and of sellouts. So here we go. This is what's going on in June. You know, ceasefire. We know that whole thing is a hoax, anyways. And like everything else, so Hezbollah in Iran are at war with the West, with the Israeli state and the U.S. As all the other allies of the U.S. are turning against them because of Donald Trump, because of the King of Babylon.
Iran is no longer just firing missiles at the Americans, it is taunting them. The Revolutionary Guards have released footage of their warheads, stickered with the bruised face of Trump and the words, "Until the last American leaves the region." Another sticker shows a map of the Strait of Hormuz, stamped, "Closed." The diplomats are still talking, but the missiles are speaking louder.
Yep, 200,000 of these ICBMs.
The cycle of strike and counter-strike between the US and Iran is accelerating, with neither side showing signs of stepping back from the brink. On June 1st, Iran's Revolutionary Guards announced they had targeted an American airbase in retaliation for a US strike on a telecommunications tower on Sirik Island in Iran's southern province of Hormuzgan. The IRGC said its aerospace force had destroyed the facility from which the attack originated, though it did not name the specific base. The attack came hours after the US had conducted what it described as defensive strikes on Iranian radar and drone command and control facilities at Gorak and on Keshem Island over the weekend. CENTCOM said those strikes were in response to Iran shooting down a US MQ-1 Predator drone that it claimed was operating over international waters.
Following the aggression carried out by the US military against a communications tower on Sirik Island, the fighters of the IRGC Aerospace Force targeted the airbase from which the attack originated, and the predetermined targets were destroyed.
But the messaging went beyond military claims. Released footage showed the IRGC launching missiles with stickers bearing Donald Trump's bruised face and the tagline, "Until the last American leaves the region." Another sticker displayed a map of the Strait of Hormuz marked as "Closed."
If the aggression is repeated, the response will be completely different, and responsibility for its consequences will rest with the aggressor and the child-killing US regime.
Meanwhile, Kuwait reported its air defenses were intercepting incoming missiles and drones on June 1st.
King of Babylon says bombing schools is fun.
The strikes, though not officially attributed, came as the US
so they're
and
just
Iran
having fun
talks
too,
aimed at ending the wider conflict. Reports suggest negotiators have drafted a framework that includes a 60-day ceasefire, measures to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and a pathway to restart negotiations on Iran's nuclear program. Neither side has officially confirmed the details. Yet the military exchange tells a different story. Each strike and counter-strike tightens the knot rather than loosens it, and the gap between what officials say about diplomacy and what military commands do in the field grows wider by the hour. Bombs fell for weeks. Tunnel entrances were buried.
Have you become as weak as we?
Washington declared success.
You see how these prophecies are speaking.
Iran's missiles were still there. New satellite imagery suggests Iran has rapidly restored access to much of its underground missile network, raising fresh questions about the long-term effectiveness of the US and Israeli bombing campaign earlier this year. Images reviewed by CNN show Iranian crews using bulldozers, dump trucks, and other construction equipment to clear tunnel entrances, repair roads, and restore access to missile facilities that were targeted during the war. According to the report, Iran has reopened 50 of the 69 tunnel entrances struck by US and Israeli forces across 18 underground missile sites. Satellite images from locations including Dezful, Isfahan, Kermanshah, and Khomein now show extensive repair work. In some cases, roads damaged by airstrikes have already been repaved, while blocked tunnel entrances have been cleared and reopened. Experts say the repairs highlight a fundamental challenge facing efforts to neutralize Iran's missile program.
There's nothing to prevent the launchers from being armed with the ample stockpile of missiles that the Iranians still have.
Analysts believe Iran still possesses around 1,000 missiles stored inside its underground facilities. Many of those sites were built over 2 decades and are protected by hundreds of meters of rock, making them difficult to destroy through
The
conventional
only thing that they really did is
For some
piss them
analysts,
off.
the lesson is straightforward. Advanced weapons can destroy access
Wait
points
till
and
the Medes
infrastructure,
get
but
involved,
restoring them
which are
often
known as
requires
your
little more than
Russians.
heavy machinery and time.
You have to use very sophisticated, very expensive weapons to do this kind of damage, and the recovery is very low-tech. It's just bulldozers.
Intelligence assessments cited by CNN indicate Tehran has already resumed rebuilding parts of its military infrastructure, including drone production and missile manufacturing capacity. The findings come despite repeated assertions from US officials that the campaign had severely degraded Iran's missile capabilities. The missiles may have been buried, but according to the latest satellite images, they were never out of reach for long.
So there we go. Humiliated, you could say Babylon is. And here we go. There's more. As this goes into.
The Persian Gulf has witnessed renewed clashes between the United States and Iran, despite recent progress in diplomatic efforts to end the war. A series clash took place on May 25th and 26th, with Iran accusing the US and Israel of targeting vessels south of Larak Island in the Strait of Hormuz. At least several people, reportedly members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, were killed. The U.S. Central Command later announced that it had carried out strikes in southern Iran against targets including boats attempting to lay mines and missile launch sites in what it described as defensive actions. During the clash, the air defense of the IRGC shot down an MQ-9 Reaper combat drone over the Persian Gulf. An RQ-4 Global Hawk high-altitude surveillance drone and an F-35 Lightning II stealth fighter jet were also forced to flee Iranian airspace after being targeted by the air defenses of the Guards. Despite the escalation, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that an agreement with the Islamic Republic is still possible. Still, on the 27th, fresh U.S. strikes were reported.
How full of shit can you get?
An Iranian military site that allegedly posed a threat to CENTCOM forces and commercial maritime traffic in the Strait of Hormuz. The command forces also intercepted and shot down multiple Iranian drones that allegedly posed a similar threat during the attack. Later, an Iranian official revealed to Tasnim news agency that a U.S. oil tanker attempted to pass through the Strait of Hormuz with its radar system turned off. It was forced to stop, then turn back after what it described as a swift and decisive response by the IRGC, which fired on the vessel. The official said that the U.S. struck a burnt area near the port Bandar Abbas. The strike caused no casualties or material damage. The Iranian response came early on May 28, with the IRGC announcing that it had targeted a U.S. airbase in response to what it described as a hostile attack on Bandar Abbas. The Guards said that the strike served as a serious warning, adding that any further aggression would be met with a stronger response. The Kuwaiti army announced around the same time the country's air defenses were confronting hostile missile and drone attacks. The target was reported to be Ali El Salem Air Base, a key hub of CENTCOM. The latest clashes were likely a form of negotiations by fire. Still, such incidents pose a serious risk. With talks between the U.S. and Iran stuck on several key issues, including the Islamic Republic's nuclear program and control over the Strait of Hormuz, such clashes could quickly escalate, reigniting the war.
Well, we know that the war is already here.
We keep hearing that Iran supports terrorism.
Here we
Instead
go.
of refuting
Yep.
that,
The
I would like to
rhetoric
turn the
against
mirror on
Iran.
the people who say that. The warring class repeats these things, but they have blood on their hands too, and that includes both political parties in the U.S., by the way. Now, here's a short list of mass killings linked to U.S. power in the last at least 30 to 40 years.
But it was
and I
fun,
filtered these by
according
at
to
least
Trump.
100 deaths in a single day. Now, if I expanded this to dozens, I would need, I don't know, dozens of screens. I'm just going to focus on these today because they're horrific and they're things that were speed bumps in American consciousness, but inform how people abroad think about us. Now, each of these were funded by U.S. taxpayers, and no one was really ever held accountable for them. Now, Iran has never launched anything close to this magnitude of terror on the U.S. We may even add a city to this list and the date today because Israel has launched deadly attacks on Tyre, Lebanon, and the surrounding regions, but we don't know the death count yet. Reports are still coming in. We know that Israel issued evacuation orders overnight. People were buried in their home. It probably is going to be a horrific one, so hold on, but we need to wait to see the extent of it. So for now, let's rewind the clock back to 1988, less than a decade after the Islamic Republic of Iran was established, when the United States committed one of the deadliest acts ever carried out on Iranian civilians. The victims' families are still alive and still remember this. This was July 3rd, 1988.
And that guy was given an award, by the way.
On July 3rd, I just said that, 1988. It was conducted by the U.S. Navy warship called the U.S. Vincennes. Now, this was a civilian plane flying from Bandar Abbas, headed for Dubai. There were 290 human beings on board, all killed in a second by bombs. 66 of them were children, mothers holding their babies, grandparents, students, workers heading for their jobs in Dubai. The plane was presenting no threat to the U.S. warship. It was following a normal commercial flight corridor over the Persian Gulf, climbing normally. It had a civilian transponder on board. It was not diving towards the ship. It was quite simply a normal 28-minute commercial flight until missiles tore the aircraft apart and bodies fell into the water, body parts floating in the surface. Now, why did the U.S. do this? The official explanation was not even an apology. It was kind of an oops. They say that they mistook the civilian Airbus for an attacking Iranian F-14 fighter jet during a tense naval confrontation in the Persian Gulf. But there are problems, of course, with that excuse. The flight was broadcasting a civilian transponder signal. It was flying a known pattern. Multiple military personnel aboard the U.S. Vincennes reportedly had data indicating that it was a commercial civilian craft. And here's another detail that Americans rarely hear. This happened during the U.S. aggression on Iran. It was called Operation Praying Mantis. Just months earlier, President Reagan had authorized Praying Mantis, which was the largest U.S. naval combat operation since World War II. Their mission was to attack Iranian oil platforms and naval forces during the Iran-Iraq War. Why were we involved in the Iran-Iraq War? Well, because the U.S. was backing Iraq in order to topple Iran, which they did for decades. Just a few years earlier, the United States was politically aligned with Iran, but foreign policy shifted on a dime, and the U.S. decided that Iran was the enemy, used Saddam Hussein to launch an Iraqi war on Iran until we decided we didn't like him anymore and get rid of him.
Well, if the last few years have taught us anything, it's that the systems we rely on fail and are all free.
Happening during the same period that Iraq was using
.com.
Now, it's worth remembering this is all happening during the same period that Iraq was using chemical weapons against the Iranian troops with the help of the CIA.
There's a movie called From Corker to Riyadh that shows you
from
the extent of the chemical warfare.
Killed between 50 and 100,000 people. The 50,000 number is reported by the CIA. So we know that we helped Iraq kill Iranian civilians and troops en masse. Now, it's notable that Iran had the technology to use chemical weapons back then, and they chose not to based on their Islamic principles. But back to the downed plane. Did the United States ever apologize for downing that plane?
Fuck no. They awarded the guy that did it.
And in fact, President Reagan at the time called it proper defensive action, which was clearly a lie. A few weeks later, Vice President Bush said this.
I'll never apologize for the United States of America, ever. I don't care what the facts are. I will lead her. I will do my level best to stand up for freedom and democracy around the world by keeping the United States of America strong and by keeping our eyes wide open as we welcome change in the world, by keeping our eyes wide open.
Okay. So he said he would not apologize. He didn't care what the facts are. You killed 300 people on a civilian plane. I don't care. Basically, was the U.S. official position.
Just like Trump doesn't care about the ordinary people that are caught in the middle.
Very small consequences for the United States. There was demand for the United Nations to condemn the incident. They did not. Instead, the United Nations passed Security Council Resolution 616, where United Nations member states said that they were deeply distressed and gravely disturbed by the incident. Wow. Big words. Iran did bring a case against the U.S. in the International Court of Justice, but the U.S. settled that case in 1996 for $131.8 million plus 2 new Airbuses. And that was the end of that. For Americans, we have largely been allowed to forget it. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. Actually, not even that, not even a sorry. But for Iranians, it became a part of the emotional foundation of their distrust of the United States. It was proof in the Iranian worldview that the United States talks endlessly about terrorism and civilian protection while excusing its own mass civilian killings. And in fact, as you can see, this memory was crystallized in Iranian culture. Here was a stamp that was issued by the Islamic Republic after the attack. It was memorialized as an American attack on innocent civilians that was in character with American foreign policy. Now, I ask you, if something had happened like this to us, wouldn't it be, for decades, a part of our collective national trauma? I submit that it would. Think about the pain that we still feel over 9/11.
Yeah, 9/11.
Any mass shooting. It's solidified in collective pain experiences and informs our global worldview. And when you combine that with later events, such as just from this year alone, the February 28th bombing of the girls' school, you begin to understand why most Iranians cannot think of the United States as a force for peace, democracy, and civilian protection. The Americans say that
it's been exposed.
Sure. Would you be able to, in any form or fashion, after this collective pain, think of the United States as the force to save you? And again, look at this short list that I compiled of U.S.-backed terror attacks in the region. And here I am again, only collaborating single-day events with over 100 killings. And even this list is not exhaustive. If you'd like to add to it, please do let me know. But if I were to expand it to U.S.-backed military attacks with at least 10 deaths per day, I would need dozens of slides. We'd be here for an hour. But each of these events, again, is a collective memory in the region to the tune of October 7th to Israelis, 9/11 to us. But they don't even get a date. We don't even say 2/28, which is the day that we bombed that Minab girls' school, or 4/8, which is the day that we killed hundreds in Beirut. Well, Israel launched those attacks with Armenian weapons. I do include here the Amariah shelter bombing because no justice ever came from that attack. On February 13th, 1991, the United States dropped 2 precision-guided bombs on this shelter
That
in
was supposed
Baghdad.
to be at war with Iraq.
Were sheltering from air raids. The blast sealed people inside, ignited an inferno so intense that entire families were burned alive, while many bodies were later found melted into the wall of the shelter. We did that. Same story for the 1996 Qana massacre on April 18th, 1996. Israeli artillery shelled the United Nations compound in Qana, Lebanon. Hundreds of civilians had taken shelter there during fighting in southern Lebanon. More than 100 civilians were killed, including women and children. Bodies were torn apart in what was at the time believed to be a safe house. Now, the United Nations later concluded there was evidence suggesting that the shelling was deliberate. And of course, Israel disputed that finding. But 30 years later, Qana, Lebanon is again being attacked by Israel. That's still happening. In April, Israel killed at least 5 people and wounded dozens in an attack on that city in the middle of the night. So I just bring you this historical truth to ask you again, when people scream about the Iranian regime supporting terrorists, do they have a mirror? Do they remember these things? Do they know who the real terrorists are? Who has actually shed blood?
And now you know why I call it American terrorism, which you should as well, right? Well, we know who Esau is, so we just, as you can see, the video is called Why Iran Doesn't Trust America. America is a lie, and that lie has been exposed on so many levels. But like everything else, though, the king of Babylon, he ain't done there. He's threatening to invade Cuba. Now, Scott Ritter, who used to work, as it says here, Scott Ritter, former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer and author of Disarmament in the Time of Pereshkiel, Arms Control and the End of the Soviet Union, served in the Soviet Union as an inspector implementing the INF Treaty and General Schwarzkopf's staff during the Gulf War. And that's when they made that attack against Iran. During the Gulf War, which we also know as Desert Storm. You see, Iran wasn't even involved in that war against Saddam Hussein because their war with Saddam Hussein ended in 1988. But nonetheless, though, the U.S. still bombed Iran because it was fun. I mean, it may as well go with what this king of Babylon says. Because it was fun, because they enjoyed it. They enjoy seeing people suffer. Kind of like a current situation that I'm in. Like I said, I'm going through a trial in my life right now with the VCA of Reading, better known as the Veterinarian Hospital Ashers of Reading. They enjoyed convincing me that, maybe to save just a few bucks, as a penny saver, I should just go ahead and amputate my dog's leg, because my dog did break her leg. Okay, so they just say, well, you could always, and they knew what the price was before they threw it at us, right? Because to get the operation needed, it would be $5,000. I mean, they're in it for the money, big time. I mean, to a person that doesn't have it, I mean, if you're poor, they'll turn against you. You already know what they do. And nonetheless, though, because it's fun. It's fun to turn people away and to see people suffer. This is what Esau enjoys, watching people suffer, and just tightening that noose, because like everything else, though, this place, fucking Babylon, believes in so-called, they're so anti-communist. But in communism, I wouldn't have been turned away in communism, you see, because everybody is on the same level playing field. That's not how it is with what you call that, I can't think of the word for it, but, it'll come back to me. But pretty much where the 1% is always rich and the 99%, they're nothing. They're peasants. What do they call it? I can't think of the word, and it was always there. But pretty much, though, it's what the West thrives upon, right? Not democracy, but there's another word for it, Capitalism. Capitalism, where 1% benefits with everything. There's the super elite rich, and then there's the 99%. In communism, that wouldn't happen. But nonetheless, though, it thrives upon oppressing the poor and just killing people for fun, because it's fun to do that. It's fun to make people suffer, because that's what this king of Babylon represents, which is what the people elected. You see, you Edomites, you show your face. And this is your face. Donald J. Trump. Jeffrey Epstein. You are Jeffrey Epstein. You are Donald Trump. So don't give me that shit that you had nothing to do with everything that's ever happened to us, because you are the face of it. With much of the world's attention on the still unresolved conflict between the U.S. and Iran, average consumer news may have forgotten, if they had forgotten, that the U.S. on the 3rd of January this year launched a mini invasion of Venezuela, which resulted in the death of scores of people, including a number of Cuban security personnel, and the capture of Venezuela President Maduro and his wife. The U.S. justified this action by noting that Maduro was, in its books, a fugitive from justice. Accusing him of narco-terrorism. Little more than a week later, on the 11th of January, President Trump posted on Truth Social account what amounted to a direct threat against the government of Cuba. Cuba lived for many years on large amounts of oil and money from Venezuela. The president wrote, stating that there had been a direct relationship between Venezuela and security support to Venezuela. Venezuela now has the U.S., the most powerful military in the world by far, by the likes of which nobody has seen before. There will be no more oil or money going to Cuba. I strongly suggest they make a deal before it's too late. Yeah. Regime change in Cuba seems it's on the cards. A month later, President Trump met with King Bibi in the White House, where the decision was made to attack Iran. Invasion of Cuba was no longer a top Trump administration policy. As of overnight, calculus changed. On the 21st of May, Rubio declared that Cuba was one of the leading sponsors of terrorism in the entire region, but the U.S. isn't. Rubio's painting Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism carries zero intellectual weight. But the fact is that similar shortcomings existed regarding the legality of the claims made by the U.S. against Maduro. But either way, though, we know what's about to happen there. Rubio may yet convince Trump to invade Cuba, rather than icing a rejuvenated foreign and national security policy that helps preserve the Republican as if there's a fucking election, as if that fucking matters anyways. Hey, look at it this way though. He's the king of Babylon, and it doesn't matter how you vote. They already have in who they have in anyways. And that's for you dumbasses that actually believe in the system that oppresses the poor. They don't give a shit about you. They don't give a goddamn about you 99%ers. And you'll never fucking wake up because you're too retarded. The only people that are awake are the elect. Matt Braken sounds the alarm on the inevitable famine set in motion by the disastrous closure of the strait. Even if a deal is made today, the logistical nightmare of remobilizing 1,500 parked ships makes a speedy return to normal impossible. So even if they were to release all of them, it's too late. On the Sunday show, geopolitical expert Braken discussed the mass famine that is already set into motion from the closure of the strait. So here we go, we'll play some of it.
It's not going to be, it costs a lot to buy food. It's going to be a competition for any food, especially next year, because we're still in 2026, we're eating the 2025 harvest. Well, the 2026 harvest is having a problem. There isn't enough fertilizer.
Yeah, because they don't know how to use substitutes.
Comeuppance next year. And then you're going to have all of these social pressures, both in American cities and in European cities, where these populations that are already rioting, arson riots like in France, all kind of just anger murders, anger gang rapes in Europe.
Sounds like 2 Ezra chapter 15.
People aren't just angry and hostile, but when they're actually hungry. And it's not a question of the government just putting more cash on their debit card when there's no food to buy with whatever amount of cash is on your debit card. And we're going to see that at the end of this year and next year. We're still watching Trump and Treasury Secretary and others saying, oh, as soon as we make a deal, the price of a barrel of oil is going to be lower than ever. It's going to be great. This is complete fantasy.
It's horse shit.
We are not ever going to see as much oil come out of the Persian Gulf as it was before February 28th. At best, it may be 50 or 60%. That's under perfect conditions. And these 1,500 ships in the Persian Gulf, even if a deal was made today, they're not going to be able to leave the Persian Gulf like it's the Oklahoma land rush, thousands of wagons in a race to put down your homestead stakes. It's not going to be like that. It's a very constricted strait, 1,500 ships. They've been parked for months. They've now got a yard of seaweed hanging off of their bottoms. The Persian Gulf is a warm body of water. When these ships are just stopped in very warm water, like 90-degree water, for months, their propellers are like a giant coral reef. Each one of these ships is going to require divers major work. And there are not enough divers. In a normal time, all of this would be happening, staggered as ships one at a time request diver services. Suddenly, all these 1,500 tankers are going to be told you're free to go. That's nice, but they can't. They're practically, growing to the bottom with seaweed and barnacles. And then it's going to take a long period for them to be sure that there's no mines, which there may or may not be, get clearance from their companies, secure the insurance, and then they're going to have to get into a queue, because you can't just have 50 ships arrive in Japan the same week. They're going to have to get in line. So this disruption of 100 days is going to be an enormous problem.
So there you have it, right there. That's what's really going on. So again, 2027 looks really bad, but we knew that things would get bad before the return of Yahweh Shai, and 2026, it ain't even over yet. Iran retaliates after U.S. strikes, warns of harsher response next time, as you saw in the videos. IRGC carried out a retaliatory strike against U.S. airbase used to attack targets in southern Lebanon southern Iran over the weekend. Latest exchange has further strained the so-called ceasefire. Well, I don't think that there's a ceasefire, but they're still on the illusion, right? IRGC launches new strikes against Kuwait after U.S. attacks until the last American soldier leaves, which you saw the video, of it right there. We'll reiterate it, right? Yeah, it shows that piece of shit. They're just showing you what they're capable of. The weak saying that they are strong. So the illusion is up. America's not that G.I. Joe coming to save everybody, but is rather Cobra. Is the terrorists themselves that they claim to be fighting against. Just like the whole lid was blown off of ISIS, that the U.S. was in fact supporting ISIS, arming ISIS to overthrow the legitimate Syrian government. That they purposely created ISIS to go in there. The whole world knows about it. They know that al-Jilani is ISIS. IRGC hits U.S. base behind attack on telecom tower in southern Iran. Following the aggression carried out hours ago by the aggressor U.S. military against communication tower on Sirk Island in Hamazigan province, the fighters of the IRGC Aerospace Force targeted the air base from which the attack originated. So, pretty much though. You could say the war is on. Iran's IRGC said it struck the U.S. base after a reported attack on Sirk Island. IRGC said early Monday, which is today pretty much, that it struck U.S. airbase allegedly used to launch attack against telecommunications tower on Sirk Island in southern Hamazigan province. According in the statement said its Air Force targeted and destroyed the base from which U.S. terrorists launched the operations. So, just reiterating. And this is where it gets interesting, though, because Hezbollah is also coming back stronger. Israeli Iron Dome launcher destroyed in Hezbollah drone strike. Fighters from Hezbollah have targeted and destroyed Israeli Iron Dome launcher deep inside occupied territories in response to Israeli ceasefire violations. Attack was carried out using an explosive Laden drone. Video shows a Hezbollah drone flying over the base, which is targeted on the border between the occupied territories and Lebanon, detecting targets before striking Iron Dome missile system. So, like everything else, though, you can see the weak getting stronger, right? Hezbollah launches rocket attacks against Israeli military sites, downs 2 ERMS 450 drones. Hezbollah noted that the projectiles hit their designated targets precisely and there were casualties among the ranks of the Israeli terrorists. Hezbollah fighters also struck Israeli military installation in the occupied city of Tiberias with a barrage of rockets. There were no immediate reports about possible casualties or the extent of the damage caused. Additionally, Hezbollah air defense units could detect and bring down an Israeli ERMS 450 long endurance surveillance drone over Bekaa Valley region using surface-to-air missile. So, pretty much though, you see in the week getting stronger. Bombing an Alawite mosque in Syrian city of Homs killed at least 8. So, more terrorism in Syria, of course, because you got ISIS leading it. At least 8 people were killed and 18 others injured in a bomb attack on Alawa Mosque in the Syrian city of Homs on Friday. Government sources said the bombing was caused by an explosive device planted inside the mosque. And we already know that this attack comes year after the fall of Damascus. The Syrian terrorists, which are not even Syrian rebel, aka ISIS, led by current President al-Jilani. Al-Jilani overthrew Bashar al-Assad, who belonged to the Alawite sect and fled to Russia after his government collapsed last year. So, yeah, it's really... Since the fall of Assad, ISIS has dedicated its efforts to destabilizing the government led by al-Jilani. They're not against al-Jilani. Al-Jilani is ISIS, dumb fuck. Let's call it what it is. ISIS is in control of Syria. Al-Qaeda, whatever you want to call them, they are all terrorists. Syria's government begins to return Alawite lands while maintaining its hold over others. Displaced Alawite farmers tell MEE that their homes and land have been occupied by Sunni neighbors and administrated a powerful state company called Itikafa. Ali says he fled from his job as a Syrian civilian servant in 2019 for refusing to do his mandatory military service. Whatever. And nonetheless, though, pretty much though, Itikafa is a state-owned agricultural investment company headquartered in northwestern Idlib province with roughly 500 employees. Khattab, the head of the Hama and Homs branch, told MEE. During the war, it managed land in opposition-held areas that was owned by Syrians who had been displaced. Well, pretty much, though. That was an area that didn't even have a government. Now, that same area, well, pretty much, under control of the terrorists. So, you can see what's going on, right? Well, the world sees Babylon the Great, the king of Babylon in particular, because definitely Trump echoes it. But Bashar al-Assad, he said this once, he says, at least with him you know who your enemy is, he's not even hiding it. He says that he's there to occupy the oil. Well, that's been the truth all along. And pretty much, though, at least that's an enemy that you see rather than these bullshitters that tell you that they're there for any other reason, that they're there on a humanitarian issue. When there's nothing humanitarian about Babylon. You know, that they are pirates, they are thieves, they are liars, they are murderers. Bashar al-Assad said at least this one admits it. And of course that's talking about Donald Trump. You know, and that's what he said in the first term of Donald Trump. Nonetheless, though, they can't put on that, oh, well, we're the liberators. We're here to liberate you from terrorism, right? When you're the sponsor of terrorism, and it's been found out. You know, especially with ISIS, and then just, you know, the whole attack against Iran this year. Jeremiah chapter 49, verse 10, because this is what's coming to Edom. I will strip bare the land of Edom, and there will be no place left to hide. Its children and its brothers and its neighbors will all be destroyed, and Edom itself will be no more. So basically, you know, Babylon the Great has a due date, meaning that it's going to be destroyed completely by them ICBMs. And I will protect the orphans who remain among you. Your widows too can depend on me for help, meaning that, okay, you know, pretty much so. A lot of them are just going to go into slavery, going to serve us. You're just getting everything ready. Meaning that you're going to see a lot more of these Edomites cling to Jake, you know, and that's what's going to happen. This is what the Most High Yahweh says, if the innocent must suffer, how much more must you? You will not go unpunished. You will drink the cup of judgment. And that's what's happening, you know, and we're going to see a big one happen. For I have sworn by my own name, saith the Lord Yahweh, that Basra will become an object of horror, a heap of ruins. It will be mocked and cursed. All its towns and villages will be desolate forever. I have heard a message from the Most High Yahweh that an ambassador was sent to the nations to say, form a coalition against Edom. And that's mostly talking about Russia and its allies. And prepare for battle. And that's what's happening with Iran. Iran's going to get a lot more allies. They're going to be against this war. And we're just at the very beginning of it. The Most High says to Edom, I will cut you down to size among the nations. You will be despised by all. And that's what's happening. We're seeing this happen systematically. You have been deceived by the fear you inspire in others. And by your own pride you live in a rock fortress and control the mountain heights. But even if you make your nest among the peaks with the eagles, I will bring you crashing down, saith the Most High. And he's about to, you know, chump. It's going to get more than a punch in the face. He's going to be brought down to the ground unlike any other time. And all these Babylonians, these Edomites, and the 2/3 that are joined unto him are going to go down right with them. You're all about to go down very soon. So hopefully this has all been edifying. Then we'll say, Barak the Yahweh, Barak the Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem Rekal Kadosh, Wa Abba Babal. Brakatam, Jehovah elect, Shalom.